Welcome to Ku English Channel.
Waves of the Mind, The Life and Legacy of Virginia Woolf. Chapter 1, A Quiet Beginning. Virginia Woolf was born on January 25, 1882, in London, England. Her full name was Adeline Virginia Stephen. She was born into a large and talented family. Her father, Leslie Stephen, was a writer, historian, and editor. He worked with many famous authors of the time. Her mother, Julia Stephen, was known for her beauty and kindness. She helped people in need and also worked as a model for painters and photographers. Virginia was the third of 4 children born to Leslie and Julia. However, there were also children from their previous marriages. In total, 8 children lived in the same house. The family home at 22 Hyde Park Gate was always full of books, conversations, and art. From an early age, Virginia was surrounded by ideas, creativity, and learning. Although the family was wealthy and respected, they did not live an easy life. In the late 1800s, women were not treated equally. Girls were expected to stay home, be quiet, and help with the house. Boys were sent to school and later to university. While Virginia's brothers studied at Cambridge University, she and her sisters were taught at home. Luckily, Virginia had access to her father's library. She read books every day, from history and literature to philosophy and poetry. Her mind was sharp, and she asked many questions. Her father noticed her intelligence and allowed her to learn freely. Her mother also supported her curiosity. Virginia would later say that books were her best friends in childhood. But life at home was not always peaceful. The family was close, yet they had problems too. Some of Virginia's half-brothers treated her badly. This caused her deep emotional pain, which she carried for many years. At that time, people did not talk openly about mental health. Virginia had to hide her feelings and try to stay strong. In 1895, when Virginia was only 13 years old, her mother suddenly died. This was a terrible shock. Julia was the heart of the family. Her death left a deep hole in Virginia's life. After this, Virginia experienced her first mental breakdown. She felt lost, confused, and deeply sad. To make things worse, just 2 years later, her half-sister Stella also died. Virginia felt that the people she loved were disappearing. These early losses shaped her thoughts about life and death. They also influenced her writing, which often explored themes of memory, sadness, and the passage of time. Despite her sorrow, Virginia continued to read and write. She kept a diary where she wrote down her thoughts, dreams, and fears. These early diaries would later help her become one of the most important writers in the English language. Writing gave her a way to express what she could not say out loud. It became a tool for healing, thinking, and understanding the world around her. In these early years, Virginia learned many things about love, pain, family, and silence. She also learned that the world was not always fair, especially for women. But instead of giving up, she chose to understand and question everything. These questions would later lead her to write books that changed the way people think about literature and life. As her teenage years continued, Virginia faced more changes, but even in her darkest moments, she held on to her love of reading and writing. These quiet beginnings, full of both wonder and sorrow, laid the foundation for a powerful voice that would one day speak to millions. Chapter 2, A New World of Ideas. After the death of her mother and half-sister, Virginia Woolf's world changed. The family tried to stay strong, but there was a heavy sadness in their home. Virginia often felt overwhelmed by her emotions. At times, she could not eat or sleep. Her mind became filled with dark thoughts. Today, people would call this depression, but in those days, such feelings were not well understood. Her father, Leslie Stephen, was also deeply affected by the loss of his wife. He became more serious and quiet. He stayed at home most of the time, reading and writing. He still cared for his children, but he did not always know how to help Virginia with her sadness. Despite her struggles, Virginia kept reading. Books became her escape. They helped her discover new ideas and voices from different times and places. She read English novels, French poetry, Greek tragedies, and philosophy. Each book opened the door into a new world. She began to imagine a life where she could be a writer, someone who could share thoughts, stories, and feelings with others. At home, her education continued. Virginia and her sister Vanessa took lessons from tutors. They studied languages, history, and art. But most of all, Virginia taught herself. She read everything she could find, and she asked big questions. Why are women not treated equally? Why is there war? What is the meaning of life? Her father encouraged serious thinking. He introduced her to great thinkers like Plato, Shakespeare, and Darwin. She wrote essays and practiced her writing. Slowly, she began to form her own voice, a voice that was curious, honest, and full of feeling. In 1902, when Virginia was 20, her brother Thoby went to Cambridge University. He met many bright and interesting students there. Through him, Virginia met a group of young men who loved art, books, and deep conversations. They later formed the famous Bloomsbury Group. This group included writers, painters, and philosophers. They met often to discuss politics, love, truth, and beauty. They questioned old rules and searched for new ways to live. They believed in freedom of thought and expression. These ideas inspired Virginia. For the first time, she felt part of a group where she could truly speak her mind. Virginia also began visiting the National Gallery and attending concerts and plays. Art and music filled her life with new energy. She started writing book reviews for newspapers and magazines. Her early articles were clear and thoughtful. They showed that she had a special way of seeing the world. Then, in 1904, another tragedy struck. Virginia's father died after a long illness. His death brought great sadness, but also a strange sense of freedom. She no longer had to live under his strong opinions and expectations. She and her siblings decided to leave their old house in Kensington and move to Bloomsbury, a place in London that was lively and full of students, artists, and free thinkers. Their new home was different. It was smaller and less formal. The rules were looser. People came and went freely. They talked late into the night about books, politics, and relationships. This was a turning point for Virginia. She began to see herself not just as a daughter or sister, but as an individual. She had her own dreams, and she was ready to follow them. Virginia's mind opened wider during these years. She explored modern ideas about science, psychology, and society. She read works by Sigmund Freud, who wrote about the unconscious mind. She learned that people often do not fully understand their own thoughts and feelings. This idea deeply interested her. It helped her develop a new kind of writing, one that followed the inner flow of the mind, rather than just outside events. She also thought a lot about time and memory. To her, time did not move in a straight line. Sometimes, a single moment could feel like forever. Other times, years could pass in a flash. These ideas would later become important in her novels. Though still young, Virginia was changing quickly. She had faced great pain but also found new hope. Her love of books, her deep questions, and her rich inner world made her ready to become a writer, not just a reviewer or essayist, but a novelist. She wanted to create stories that showed the truth of life as she saw it, full of joy and sorrow, silence and music, love and fear, all flowing together like waves. The next chapter in her life would take her even deeper into the world of literature and closer to finding her true voice. Chapter 3. Finding her voice. In the years after her father's death, Virginia began to build a new life in Bloomsbury. This area of London became her home and her creative space. She lived there with her sister Vanessa and her brothers. Their house was often filled with artists, writers, and students. There was always something interesting happening: lively talks, laughter, and strong opinions. This group of friends became known as the Bloomsbury Group. They did not believe in following old rules. They wanted to live honestly, think freely, and create new art. They believed in love without marriage, peace instead of war, and truth instead of tradition. Their ideas were fresh and exciting. Virginia felt at home in this world. For the first time, she could fully express herself. She didn't need to hide her thoughts or pretend to be someone she was not. She began to explore what it meant to be a woman, a thinker, and a writer in a changing world. During this time, Virginia began to work seriously on fiction. She had already written many essays and reviews for newspapers, but now she wanted something more. She wanted to write novels, books that could show the deep and complex lives of people, especially women. She worked hard. Sometimes she wrote for hours each day. She studied other writers like George Eliot, Thomas Hardy, and Henry James. But she also wanted to do something new. She was not interested in traditional stories with a simple beginning, middle, and end. Instead, she wanted to write about what happens inside the mind. What do people think when they're alone? What memories rise when they hear music? What do they feel but never say? In her personal life, Virginia continued to face emotional struggles. She had periods of deep sadness and confusion. At times, she felt weak and afraid. These were likely episodes of what we now call bipolar disorder, a mental illness that causes extreme mood swings. Sometimes she felt full of energy and ideas. Other times, she felt hopeless and empty. After one breakdown, she spent time in a quiet place outside of London to rest. During her recovery, she read, wrote, and walked in nature. These peaceful times helped her mind heal. She began to understand how important it was to care for her mental health. Writing remained her best medicine. It helped her put her thoughts in order and gave her a reason to keep going. In 1910, an event called the Dreadnought Hoax brought Virginia into the public eye, but in a very unusual way. She and some friends from the Bloomsbury Group dressed up as Abyssinian royals from Africa and tricked the British Navy into giving them an official welcome. It was a joke, but it showed Virginia's playful side and her clever use of disguise and performance. Later in life, she would return to the idea of people wearing masks in society. Then, in 1912, something important happened. Virginia got married. Her husband was Leonard Woolf. He was a writer and a thinker, like her. They had known each other for years and shared many ideas. Leonard had just returned from working in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, where he had been part of the British government. He had seen the problems of colonialism and wanted to make the world better through books and political action. Their marriage was not based on passion but on deep friendship and mutual respect. They supported each other's work and cared for each other's well-being. Leonard understood Virginia's mental health problems and did his best to protect her from stress. He gave her space when she needed to rest and encouraged her when she was ready to write. Together, they created a peaceful life in Richmond, just outside London. The air was clean, the streets were quiet, and nature was all around them. This environment gave Virginia the calm she needed to work on her first novel. That novel would take many years to finish. But it was during these early years of marriage that Virginia truly began to find her voice as a writer, one that was sensitive, honest, and new. Virginia also started to think more deeply about women's place in society. Why were women expected to marry, cook, and stay quiet? Why were their minds ignored, their talents hidden? These questions stayed in her mind. Later, she would answer them in some of the most powerful books of the century. By 1912, Virginia Woolf was no longer just a curious young woman who loved books. She had become a serious writer with a unique way of thinking. She had found people who supported her, and she had found the courage to begin her first novel. But this was only the beginning. In the years to come, her writing would change not only her own life, but also the world of literature forever. Chapter 4. The Birth of a Writer. In 1913, Virginia Woolf faced one of the darkest times in her life. She had just finished the first version of her novel, The Voyage Out, but instead of feeling proud or excited, she felt exhausted and afraid. The long hours of writing had taken a toll on her health. Her mind felt heavy, and her thoughts became confused. Once again, she experienced a mental breakdown. This time, it was very serious. Virginia was taken to a care home where she was watched day and night. Doctors did not fully understand her condition. They said she needed rest, quiet, and simple food. For months, She stayed in bed, sometimes unable to speak or eat. Leonard, her husband, stayed close and tried everything he could to help her recover. These were difficult months, but slowly, Virginia began to return to herself. Her mind cleared and her strength returned. She started reading again, then writing. Step by step, she rebuilt her life. She learned to listen to her body and to protect her mental health. She knew that stress could break her, but writing could heal her. In 1915, The Voyage Out was finally published. It was her first novel. The book told the story of a young woman named Rachel who travels to South America and begins to discover life, love, and her own thoughts. Like Virginia, Rachel was curious, sensitive, and unsure of her place in the world. The novel received mixed reviews. Some people said it was too slow or too strange. Others saw great promise in her unique style. Virginia did not write like other authors. She didn't just describe events, she explored what people were thinking and feeling inside. Her writing was like water, moving gently between thoughts, memories, and conversations. After finishing The Voyage Out, Virginia began to dream of a new kind of freedom. She wanted to control not just what she wrote, but how it was published. Most books at that time were printed by big companies. Writers had little power over how their work looked or where it was sold. So, in 1917, Virginia and Leonard started something amazing, their own publishing company. They called it the Hogarth Press. It began as a small project in their dining room. They used a hand printing machine and printed each page themselves. At first, it was just a hobby to help Virginia relax, but it soon became something much bigger. The Hogarth Press gave them the freedom to publish what they wanted, books that were thoughtful, unusual, or bold. They printed short stories, poetry, and essays. They published works by important writers like T.S. Eliot, Catherine Mansfield, and Sigmund Freud. And of course, they published Virginia's own writing. This small press changed the world of literature. It gave a voice to new ideas and helped bring modern writing into the spotlight. During these years, the world outside was also changing. World War I was shaking Europe. Between 1914 and 1918, millions of people died. The war changed how people thought about life, death, and the future. Many young men, including Virginia's brother Thoby, were lost in the fighting. Families were broken, and people lived with fear and sadness. Virginia did not fight in the war, but it affected her deeply. She hated violence and believed in peace. She saw how war destroyed not just cities, but also minds. Her writing began to explore these ideas: the damage caused by war, the silence of those left behind, and the search for meaning in a broken world. At the same time, Virginia's marriage with Leonard grew stronger. Though their relationship was not physical in the usual sense, it was full of respect, care, and shared purpose. Leonard helped manage the Hogarth Press and gave Virginia the space she needed to write. He cooked meals, organized business, and watched over her health. In return, Virginia trusted him deeply and wrote him letters full of warmth and wit. This period also saw the start of Virginia's relationship with another writer, Vita Sackville-West. Vita was a poet and novelist, and the two women formed a strong emotional and romantic bond. Their letters to each other were full of admiration and playful affection. Vita became the inspiration for one of Virginia's most creative novels, Orlando, which would come later. By 1918, the war was ending, and the world was beginning to change. Women had worked in factories, driven buses, and taken on many roles during the war. They began to demand more rights, including the right to vote. Virginia watched these changes with hope. She believed women had powerful minds and deserved the same chances as men. These ideas would soon become the heart of her most famous work. For now, though, Virginia stood on the edge of something new. She had survived illness, published her first novel, and created a home for bold, beautiful writing. She was no longer just a reader, she was a writer with a voice of her own. The next chapter in her life would take that voice even further, into stories that would change literature forever. Chapter 5. A Room of Her Art. After the war ended in 1918, life in England began to change. The country was tired and wounded, but people were ready for a new beginning. Women had worked hard during the war, and now many of them were asking for more freedom. They wanted to study, work, and vote. In 1918, some women in Britain won the right to vote for the first time. It was a step forward. Virginia Woolf saw this moment as an important time for women and for writers. She believed that women had been kept quiet for too long. They had stories to tell and ideas to share, but they needed the right space and freedom to do it. In 1919, Virginia published her second novel, Night and Day. It followed the lives of two women in London, exploring love, work, and the question of independence. The book was more traditional than her later works, but it showed her growing interest in the thoughts and emotions of women. Critics said it was thoughtful and clear, but not very bold. Virginia knew she could go further. At the same time, Virginia and Leonard moved into a new house in the countryside, Monk's House, in the village of Rudmore. It was small and quiet, surrounded by green fields and flowers. Virginia loved walking in the garden and thinking alone. She created a writing space just for herself, a simple room where she could think and write in peace. This was the dream she often talked about, a room of one's own. In the early 1920s, Virginia began to write in a new way. She wanted her stories to feel more like real life, not just what happened on the outside, but what people thought and felt inside. She experimented with stream of consciousness writing. This style followed the flow of thoughts as they came, without always following strict rules. It was like listening to someone's mind. In 1922, she published Jacob's Room. It was a very different novel. The book told the story of Jacob, a young man, through the memories and impressions of others. Readers never saw Jacob directly. Instead, they saw how he touched the lives of those around him. The novel was quiet, poetic, and full of deep feeling. Some people found it confusing, but others praised its beauty and freshness. Virginia was not trying to please everyone. She wanted to explore the truth of human experience, how people think, remember, and feel. She believed that life was not a straight story. It was full of small moments, changes, and questions. In 1925, she published one of her greatest works, Mrs. Dalloway. This novel took place in a single day in London. It followed Clarissa Dalloway as she prepared for a party. But at the same time, it also followed the thoughts of Septimus Warren Smith, a former soldier suffering from the mental scars of war. Mrs. Dalloway showed Virginia's genius. She moved smoothly between characters' thoughts, showing their memories, fears, and hopes. She wrote about time, not just the clock, but how people feel time passing. A simple walk down the street became a journey through years of memory. Readers and critics praised Mrs. Dalloway. It was modern, emotional, and wise. It showed that Virginia Woolf had found her voice strong, unique, and unforgettable. During these years, Virginia also began giving lectures at women's colleges. She spoke to young female students about writing, education, and independence. She told them that women needed more than talent. They needed space, time, and money to write. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction, she famously said. Her words became the base for a powerful essay, which would later become a book called A Room of One's Own. In it, Virginia imagined what would have happened if Shakespeare had a sister with equal talent, but no education, no support, and no freedom. Would she have become a great writer? Probably not. This idea shocked many people, but it opened eyes. Virginia was not just writing novels, she was changing the way people thought about women, creativity, and society. At the Hogarth Press, Virginia and Leonard continued to publish bold and important works. They helped new writers and shared ideas that larger publishers avoided. The press became a home for fresh voices and big questions. Virginia's own life was filled with work, letters, friends, and long walks. She wrote in the mornings, rested in the afternoons, and often spent evenings talking with Leonard or friends from Bloomsbury. She kept a diary where she recorded her thoughts, joys, and fears. These diaries would later help the world understand her mind and art. Still, Virginia's mental health continued to rise and fall. Sometimes, her moods grew dark and heavy, but when she felt strong, she used her energy to create. She believed that beauty, truth, and honesty were worth writing for, even if the world was imperfect. By 1925, Virginia Woolf was no longer just an author. She was a voice of her time. She showed that fiction could be a deep look into the human soul. She encouraged women to believe in their minds and speak their truth. And she reminded readers that the small moments of life, buying flowers, walking through a city, remembering a summer, could hold great meaning. The next years would bring even more creativity, new friendships, and bold experiments in writing. But they would also bring pain and fear, as the world moved once again toward darkness. Chapter 6. Waves of Thought. By the late 1920s, Virginia Woolf had become one of the most respected writers in England. Her books were not always easy to read, but people who took the time to understand them were often amazed. She wrote in a way that touched the mind and the heart. Her words flowed like water, showing how people think, feel, and remember. After Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia continued to push the limits of writing. She didn't want to write simple stories. She wanted to show how life really felt. Messy, beautiful, and full of thought. In 1927, she published To the Lighthouse, one of her most famous novels. To the Lighthouse was set on a quiet island where a family spent their summer holidays. The book didn't have much action. Instead, it focused on the small details of life: meals, conversations, memories, and silence. The story moved between different characters, showing how each person saw the world differently. One of the most powerful parts of the novel was its center section, called Time Passes. In just a few pages, Virginia showed how the years moved by, bringing change and loss. A great war came and went. Family members died. The house stood empty. And then, finally, life returned. Readers praised To the Lighthouse for its beauty, emotion, and deep truth. Virginia had captured something special: the feeling of time and the mystery of memory. The book was also deeply personal. It was based on her own childhood holidays in Cornwall, and the characters were inspired by her parents. Writing this novel helped Virginia deal with her past. It was a way to understand her parents' lives and her own feelings about them. Through art, she found peace. In 1928, Virginia was invited to give a talk at two women's colleges at Cambridge University. Her subject was women and fiction. She used the opportunity to share powerful ideas about women, writing, and freedom. These talks became the basis for her book, A Room of One's Own, published in 1929. The book was not just about writing, it was about the world. Virginia argued that for centuries, women had been held back by society. They had little money, little education, and no space to think. She said that, to write, a woman must have money and a room of her own. Without these things, it was hard to create. She imagined a character named Shakespeare's sister, a woman with great talent but no chance to use it. She showed how many women's voices had been lost through history. A Room of One's Own became a key text in women's literature. It was clear, clever, and full of life. Many women felt inspired by it. Virginia was no longer just a novelist. She was a leader in the fight for women's rights. At the same time, she was preparing her most experimental work, The Waves. This book, published in 1931, was like nothing anyone had read before. It followed 6 characters from childhood to old age, but it didn't have a normal story. Instead, each character spoke in poetic monologues, sharing their thoughts and emotions. Between their voices were short sections describing the movement of the sea and the sun, symbols of time and life. The Waves was a challenge to read, but it was also beautiful. It felt like a dream or a piece of music. It was full of questions about identity, friendship, and death. Many critics believed it was Virginia's masterpiece. Writing The Waves took great effort. Virginia worked long hours and often felt tired and unsure. She wrote in her diary that she was writing to the rhythm of the waves. She wanted her book to feel natural, like the ocean or the wind. During this time, Virginia's friendships grew deeper. She spent more time with Vita Sackville-West, the writer who had inspired her earlier book, Orlando. Though their romance had faded, their friendship remained strong. They exchanged long letters and shared their thoughts on books, travel, and life. Virginia also made new friends in the literary world. She supported younger writers and helped publish their work through the Hogarth Press. She was generous with her time, even when she felt tired. Many writers admired her courage and honesty, but even as her writing reached new heights, Virginia still struggled with her mental health. She had days when her thoughts grew dark. She feared that her mind would collapse again. Leonard remained her closest support. He watched over her health and tried to protect her from stress. Their relationship, though sometimes quiet, was full of deep care. By the end of 1931, Virginia had published several important books, given powerful speeches, and become a voice for women writers. Her work was being read around the world. She was no longer an outsider. She had created a new way of writing, one that showed the beauty of the inner life. And yet, Virginia knew that her journey was not over. New ideas were forming in her mind. The world around her was changing once more. A new storm was coming, one that would shake Europe again. But for now, Virginia stood like a lighthouse in the dark, her words shining across the sea of time. Chapter 7: Shadows and Light. In the early 1930s, Virginia Woolf was both strong and fragile. Her writing had reached new levels of beauty and depth, but her health, both physical and mental, remained uncertain. After the success of The Waves, Virginia took some time to rest. Writing that book had drained her energy. She walked in the gardens of Monk's house, wrote in her diary, and read books. She also continued to run the Hogarth Press with Leonard. The press was now well known and respected, publishing important writers like T.S. Eliot, Sigmund Freud, and Catherine Mansfield. Virginia and Leonard believed in publishing ideas that mattered. They did not focus on money or fame. They wanted to bring fresh, honest, and even risky writing to the world. This gave Virginia a sense of purpose, especially as Europe became more troubled. The early 1930s were a time of growing fear. Adolf Hitler had come to power in Germany. Fascism was rising. Books were being burned. Writers, artists, and thinkers were being silenced. Virginia and Leonard, who were both strongly against war and hatred, watched these events with deep worry. Leonard was Jewish, and they both knew that his life could be in danger if war came. They began to prepare. They stored food and made a plan to escape if needed. The peaceful days of Monk's house felt darker now, with the sound of war once again rising in the distance. In 1933, Virginia published a collection of essays called The Common Reader, second series. In these essays, she explored many subjects: literature, history, and the lives of women. She continued to speak for the importance of freedom in thought and expression. She wanted people to read deeply, think clearly, and never accept simple answers. One of Virginia's most famous essays from this time was about the life of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's dog, Flush. At first, this may seem like a small subject. But in Flush, a biography, published in 1933, Virginia used humor and imagination to explore big ideas: class, love, freedom, and even the limits of language. The book told the story of Flush, a spaniel who belonged to the poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But it also showed how society treated women and animals, and how the smallest life could still hold deep meaning. Readers were surprised by the book's warmth and insight. Some critics thought it was light, but others saw it as another sign of Virginia's creative power. At the same time, Virginia began work on a new novel, The Years. This book would become one of her most successful in terms of sales. It told the story of the Pargeter family across many years, showing how life in England changed from the 1880s to the 1930s. Virginia found this book difficult to write. She wanted to connect private life and public history, to show how war, politics, and social change affected families and individuals. It was a huge project, and she rewrote parts of it many times. In her diary, Virginia often doubted herself. She worried that her writing was not strong enough, or that her ideas were too big to fit into one book. Still, she continued. She knew that writing was her way of making sense of the world. During these years, Virginia also grew closer to some of the younger women in her circle. One of them was Ethel Smythe, a strong and lively composer. They shared letters full of energy and affection. Ethel admired Virginia's mind, and Virginia was moved by Ethel's courage and passion. These friendships gave Virginia support during difficult times, but her health remained fragile. She suffered from headaches, tiredness, and periods of deep sadness. Sometimes, she feared she was losing control of her thoughts. Leonard stayed by her side, carefully watching for signs of danger. He was her protector, though he also felt helpless at times. Despite the shadows, there was still light. Virginia continued to explore beauty in her writing. She found joy in the changing seasons, in music, in the sound of waves, and in the pages of books. Her connection to nature remained strong. In 1935, she finished The Years, but she was not satisfied. She called it the wrong book, even though it would soon become one of her bestsellers. Readers liked its clear style and the way it showed how life slowly changes. For Virginia, though, the book felt too safe. She had always been a risk-taker, and now she wanted to go further. Still, The Years marked an important moment. It showed how families carry history, how the past lives in the present, and how memory shapes our understanding of the world. It was a book full of time, just like Virginia's earlier novels, but told in a more traditional way. As she entered her 50s, Virginia stood between two worlds. One was the world of the past, full of quiet gardens, afternoon walks, and books. The other was a world of danger, war, and loud change. She felt both the weight of history and the need to keep writing. Her voice, soft yet clear, remained strong. Even in fear, she kept creating. Even in doubt, she kept searching for truth. The next chapter of her life would bring deep questions about life, death, and art, and the final masterpiece that would speak to generations. Chapter 8. The Final Masterpiece. By the mid-1930s, Virginia Woolf had already written many important books. She was well known not just in England, but across the world. Her novels, essays, and speeches had changed how people thought about writing, women, and the mind. Still, she felt there was more to say. She was not finished yet. In 1936, Virginia began thinking about a new novel. This one would be different. It would be about a single day, but not a normal day. It would take place after someone's death. The story would show how people remember, how they deal with loss, and how life continues even after tragedy. The book would be called Between the Acts. At the same time, the world around Virginia was becoming more dangerous. In Spain, a civil war was tearing the country apart. In Germany and Italy, fascist leaders were growing stronger. And in England, people began to fear that another world war was coming. Virginia and Leonard were deeply worried. They had lived through World War I and remembered the pain it caused. Now, it seemed that history was repeating itself. The fear of bombs, broken cities, and lost lives was returning. Leonard, who was Jewish, knew that he might be a target if the Nazis came to England. Virginia worried about him, and he worried about her. They talked often about what they would do if war broke out. They even considered ending their lives together if things became too terrible. But despite their fear, Virginia kept writing. In 1938, she published 3 Guineas, a long essay that asked hard questions about war, education, and power. In the book, she used letters and questions from a fictional person to explore how women could help prevent war. Virginia believed that war was not just a problem of soldiers and leaders, it was also a problem of how society treated people, especially women. If women had more power, more education, and more freedom, she argued, the world might become more peaceful. She wanted people to think, not just follow orders. 3 Guineas was bold and brave. Some readers loved it. Others found it too sharp, too critical. But Virginia did not write to please everyone. She wrote to tell the truth as she saw it. Meanwhile, she continued working on Between the Acts. This novel was set in a small English village on the day of a summer play. The villagers gathered to watch the performance, which showed scenes from English history. The play was playful, strange, and full of meaning. As the villagers watched, the story moved between their thoughts. Some people were bored, others were touched. Some were thinking about their own past or their worries about the future. What made Between the Acts special was its rhythm. The book flowed like music. Virginia used language in a poetic way, creating a gentle but powerful feeling. She captured the sense of a world on the edge of change, calm yet ready to break. In the background, the threat of war was always present. Though the book never named it directly, the tension could be felt. The villagers were acting out a story, but real life was much more serious. Everyone knew that peace could end at any moment. Writing this novel gave Virginia both joy and sadness. She was proud of her work, but her mental health was growing worse. She often felt tired, confused, or deeply sad. She worried that her mind might break again, as it had in the past. Still, she worked every day. She wanted the book to be perfect. She wrote and rewrote, shaping each sentence with care. In her diary, she said she hoped Between the Acts would be her last novel. She felt she had said what she needed to say. In 1939, World War II finally began. Bombs fell on London. Families had to leave their homes. Many buildings were destroyed. Leonard and Virginia moved between Monk's House and London, trying to stay safe. But the fear followed them. Despite everything, Virginia finished Between the Acts. She did not publish it right away. She needed time, and she was not sure how people would receive it during a time of war. The world had changed again, and she was trying to find her place in it. As the 1930s ended, Virginia's life was full of light and shadow. She had created one of the greatest collections of work in modern English literature. Her books touched the minds of readers everywhere. She had become a voice for thought, beauty, and freedom. But inside, her battles continued. She loved deeply Leonard, her friends, her garden, her work, but she also feared losing herself. Her mind, once her greatest gift, had also become her greatest struggle. Still, she had one more book to offer. Between the Acts was a gift of hope, a quiet reflection in a world full of noise. It showed that even in dark times, people could come together. They could share stories, remember the past, and look toward the future. Virginia had always believed in the power of words. She had used them to explore life's deepest questions: who we are, how we think, and what it means to live. Now, with war once again changing the world, her own final chapter was beginning. Chapter 9: The Breaking Point. By 1940, Virginia Woolf was living in a world full of fear and confusion. World War II had begun. German planes dropped bombs on London almost every night. People had to sleep in shelters or basements. Families were separated. Homes were destroyed. Everything felt unsafe and uncertain. Virginia and Leonard lived part of the time in Monk's House, their country home in Sussex, and part of the time in London, but no place felt truly safe. The sound of bombs and planes made it hard to sleep. Every day brought bad news, more deaths, more destruction, more fear. Even worse than the war outside was the battle inside Virginia's own mind. She had always been sensitive, but now her feelings became heavier. Her sadness turned into deep depression. She felt hopeless, like a storm was growing inside her. During this time, she continued to work on Between the Acts. She wanted to make it the best it could be. But her usual joy in writing was missing. She often wrote in her diary about her worries. She feared that the war would destroy everything she loved: books, art, beauty, and peace. The Woolfs also felt personally in danger. Leonard was Jewish, and they both knew that if Germany invaded England, he might be arrested or killed. Virginia wrote in her diary that they had made a plan to end their lives if the Nazis came. This thought brought her some comfort, but it was also a sign of how serious her fear had become. Virginia also felt that she was a burden to Leonard. She loved him deeply and knew he loved her too, but during her dark times, she believed he would be better off without her. These thoughts were not true, but depression made them seem real. In the early months of 1941, Virginia's mental health became worse. She heard voices and felt that she could no longer write clearly. Her greatest talent, her mind, now felt like her greatest enemy. Leonard tried everything to help. He cared for her, gave her medicine, and watched her closely. But there were limits to what he could do. Mental illness, especially at that time, was hard to treat. Many people did not understand it, and there were few good options for care. Despite her pain, Virginia finished the final version of Between the Acts. She placed the manuscript in a drawer and left a note for Leonard saying it was ready for publication. She still wanted her work to live on, even if she felt that she could not. On March 28, 1941, Virginia woke up early. She put on her coat, filled her pockets with stones, and walked toward the nearby river. She had made her decision. She could no longer live with the pain inside her. She wrote 2 final letters, one to Leonard and one to her sister Vanessa. Then she entered the water. Her body was found 3 weeks later. The news of Virginia Woolf's death shocked the literary world. She was only 59 years old. Many people could not believe that such a strong, creative, and intelligent woman had chosen to end her life. But those closest to her knew how deeply she had suffered. Leonard was heartbroken, but he respected her decision. In his heart, he knew that she had fought hard for many years. He later published Between the Acts, just as she had wished. The novel was praised for its beauty, its quiet strength, and its deep understanding of life. Virginia's death marked the end of one of the most original voices in English literature, but her words continued to live on. Her books, essays, and diaries became even more popular after her death. People began to understand how far ahead of her time she truly was. In the years that followed, Virginia Woolf became a symbol of many things, of artistic courage, of women's rights, of mental health awareness, and of the quiet beauty that can be found even in sadness. Though her life ended in sorrow, her work remained full of life. It reminded readers to look closely at the world, to think deeply, and to listen to the voices inside themselves. Chapter 10. A Voice That Lives Ode. After Virginia Woolf's death in 1941, her books did not disappear. In fact, they became even more important. Over time, more and more people began to read her work, talk about it, and study it. She had created something that could not die. Her words. Virginia's husband, Leonard Woolf, took care of her legacy. He worked hard to keep her books in print. He also helped publish her personal writings, including her diaries and letters. These showed a different side of Virginia, a woman who was funny, thoughtful, loving, and always curious about life. As the years passed, readers and writers from around the world discovered the beauty and power of her writing. Her novels were not easy for everyone at first. Some people found them strange because they didn't follow the usual rules of storytelling. But others found something new in her pages, something honest and real. Virginia Woolf wrote about time, memory, and the inner life of people. She showed how small moments could hold deep meaning. She gave voice to thoughts and feelings that many people had but could not express. One of her most famous books, Mrs. Dalloway, became a classic. It was turned into plays and movies. Writers and artists were inspired by it. Another book, To the Lighthouse, became required reading in many schools and universities. It was praised for its beautiful language and deep ideas about family and change. Women, in particular, found strength in Virginia's work. In A Room of One's Own, she said that a woman must have money and a private space if she wants to write. This message touched many readers. It reminded them that women had often been left out of history, not because they lacked talent, but because they were not given the chance to grow. In the 1970s and 1980s, during the rise of modern feminism, Virginia Woolf became a powerful symbol. Scholars studied her work as an example of how women could break free from old ideas and write in new ways. Her life became a subject of books, plays, and even films. More recently, Virginia's openness about her mental health struggles has helped people talk about depression and anxiety. Her journals showed that even someone very smart and creative could suffer deeply. This helped reduce the shame around mental illness and encouraged more open conversations. Virginia Woolf's influence can be seen in many places. Writers like Toni Morrison, Margaret Atwood, and Zadie Smith have all spoken about how her work shaped their own. Her ideas about how to write, how to feel, and how to think continue to inspire. There is even a special term in literature called stream of consciousness, which Virginia helped make popular. This style of writing tries to show how thoughts move inside the mind. It feels natural and flowing, like real thinking. Today, many writers use this technique thanks to her. Virginia Woolf is remembered not just for her writing, but also for her courage. She lived in a time when women were expected to be quiet and obedient, but she asked questions. She challenged rules. She created something new. At Monk's House, where she spent so many years, her spirit can still be felt. Visitors come to see her garden, her writing room, and the quiet countryside that gave her peace. Her books fill libraries and bookstores across the world. Her name is known by people of many languages and cultures. She once wrote, "Books are the mirrors of the soul." In her case, her books are a mirror of her own soul, intelligent, sensitive, brave, and full of wonder. Virginia Woolf's story reminds us that even in pain, beauty can grow. Even in silence, a voice can be heard. And even when life ends, the words we leave behind can keep living, touching hearts and minds for generations. For English learners, her story is more than just history. It is a chance to improve language skills, but also to understand human life more deeply. Through her words, we can learn not just English, but also empathy, creativity, and the power of expression. Virginia Woolf is gone, but her voice lives on.